That's a bit unclear. Over a 5-year window, the firm's market cap has contracted by over 80%. We'll also be speaking about Boeing's latest fleet decision in the next 5 minutes, but the market view of the aerospace firm today was decidedly negative, down 3.6% in the pre-market session before turning positive. The firm's shares are up 0.25%, even as its bonds fell. Here's what's coming up tonight. Dozens of Boeing 777 aircraft grounded after a failure of a Pratt & Whitney engine. South Africa's alcohol industry loses an estimated $2.4 billion due to pandemic lockdowns. And Bitcoin's wild ride continues. It fell by more than 16% after a rally to a record over $58,000. All right, then, quite a bit to get through tonight. But let's start the hour in the aviation sector. Airlines in the United States, South Korea and Japan have grounded dozens of Boeing 777 aircraft after one of the jets suffered an engine failure, a rather dramatic one, over the weekend. A United Airlines plane carrying some 231 passengers was forced to make an emergency landing on Saturday after its right engine broke apart mid-flight. Now, to be clear, no one was injured in this particular flight. But the temporary suspension applies to all 777 models which are powered by a Pratt & Whitney engine. Boeing has urged airlines to suspend operating them until US regulators identify the appropriate inspection protocol. According to the American plane maker, 69 of the 777 jets in service at the moment are powered by this engine. Another 59, however, are currently in storage. So then let's get some updates on the story. Owen Fairclough joins us from Washington, D.C. with more data on the story. So, Owen, barely 10% of the 777 fleet, I believe there's 1,600 of those birds flying around the world at the moment, barely 10% of those have the PW400 engines from Pratt & Whitney that failed. So why was a market reaction initially to this recommended grounding so negative? Owen, if you can hear me, just to get your feel on what exactly is going on here, barely 10% of the 777 fleet around the world have these PW400 engines from Pratt & Whitney. So why was a market reaction to the recommended grounding so negative today?
Well, essentially, and forgive me, you broke up just briefly there. Essentially, there's perhaps a sense among shareholders of Boeing that perhaps the damage here is limited. Yes. United Airlines is the only US carrier using this particular model of the 777 with this particular Pratt & Whitney engine. And you have to remember that this is the most important market in the world for a company like Boeing, but there are many, many other airlines. So not United Airlines is the only one here actually using this particular model of the 777. And of course, you have to wonder about the reputational damage to Boeing as well. Just a couple of months after the 737 MAX resumed flying, after the entire worldwide fleet was grounded in the wake of not one, but 2 fatal crashes within 5 months of each other. But for this particular model of the 777, it does seem that the fallout is limited. That said, we know that in the Netherlands, a Boeing 747 using this Pratt & Whitney engine was at the center of another mid-air incident where falling debris came from that plane. It's not clear yet whether these 2 incidents are linked, but the last thing Boeing needs right now is another reputational problem with its aircraft.
Indeed. So United has yanked all the 24 777s with this engine from service. But even given the reduction in demand for air travel in the continental United States, how will they plug the hole that leaves in their fleet?
Yeah, and this is going to be a real problem for Boeing right now. The 777X is the successor to the Boeing 777, but already Boeing has had to delay the introduction of this aircraft. It's not going to be online until 2022 at the earliest. There are some reports saying it may not even come into service until 2023. This is one of the largest aircraft ever made. There are 2 of them, 2 of these 777X models. That has cost Boeing billions of dollars. Last year it recorded losses of more than $11 billion, and that wasn't just down to the pandemic, of course, cutting into orders, cutting into aircraft manufacturers around the world, or airlines, I should say, ordering Boeing models. It's also, of course, the reputational damage for Boeing. That said, last month in January, for example, it did deliver more aircraft than Airbus. So there is a sense, perhaps, for Boeing that it has put the worst of it behind it. But as I mentioned, the last thing it needs right now is another near disaster that we saw happen as this Boeing 777 was taking off from Denver in Colorado over the weekend.
Indeed, we'll leave it there for the time being. On Fairclough there in DC. Just a quick update as far as Boeing share price is concerned, up about $1, 0.5%, $218 a share at the moment. Now, on to Africa's youngest country. The central bank of theirs introduced an entirely new banknote of 1,000 South Sudanese pounds as the East African nation continues to struggle with hyperinflation amid a shortage of foreign currency reserves. Dier Tong Ngor is the governor of the Bank of South Sudan, said the bank will soon embark on a nationwide campaign to educate the public on this entirely new banknote. When we spoke earlier in the day, I started by asking him about the bank's change in policy with regard to monetary financing.
Currency is important, or the function of the currency is very specific. A currency is mainly a medium of exchange. So printing the currency has nothing much to do really with the inflation in the country, unless we misuse it, unless we print it and then we use it to finance government activities. But if currency is just printed to fulfill its main function of being a medium of exchange, then printing a higher denomination or printing a lot of it doesn't automatically affect in inflation.
So just to be 100% clear then, Governor, you're essentially making the case here that you as the Bank of South Sudan, you're not engaging in any monetary financing for the government.
No, we are not. We are not. In the past, we have been doing that, and it has been. It did affect our economy very badly. Inflation were soaring, and we have been advocating against the monetary financing of the budget, of the deficit, and government has come to the agreement with us. And in September last year, 2020, a very clear decision was taken by the cabinet that monetary financing must be stopped, and we have to stop it from that time. So we are not engaging, we are not going to engage in monetary financing. I know our Bank of South Sudan Act empower us or allows us only to finance government deficit to a level that cannot exceed 5% of the recurring revenue of the government. We are even going far than that, and saying that we should not be financing at all the deficit.
Just to be clear, let's put some numbers on that, because yes, oil prices have gone up. We are well past $65 a barrel on Brent last week. At the same time, as we mentioned, yes, there's a peace dividend that's essentially rolling through the economy. But South Sudan's oil production levels had fallen significantly in the wake of that particular civil war. Can you give us a sense of where oil production levels are at the moment, and to what extent that's helping to close the fiscal deficit?
Oil production has improved significantly in the last year or so. Following the conflict in 2013, our oil production almost collapsed even to around 100, 110, 120,000 barrels a day. We have increased now that to almost 170, 180, and a lot of effort and investments are being done now. So we think it will even go more higher than that in the coming few months and a year. Of course, in terms of oil prices, maybe 6 months ago or so, we were talking about a price of 30 or just 30 something. Now we are going to 55. So that is significant. And as I said, also the non-oil revenue, the collection of non-oil revenue, has almost more than doubled in the last few months also.
Speaking of support from external parties, in November, South Sudan borrowed for the first time from the IMF about $52 million or so coming through from the Rapid Credit Facility. Will you need further support from the IMF in order to give you the breathing room you need to deal with this balance of payments crisis that has been triggered in part by the sharp depreciation of the currency?
Correct. Yes, we since the signing of the peace agreement, we have been engaging the IMF and the international financial institutions, and the loan that we get through the Rapid Credit Facility did help us a long way to stabilize the exchange rate, and following that successful implementation of the terms of that loan, we are now in negotiation with the IMF for RCF2. And we are confident also with the reforms that we are undertaking, we would also get help from IMF in terms of releasing a second tranche from the Rapid Credit Facility that we got last time. And we are also talking to the IMF on an agreed program, a staff monitored program.
Making a monetary policy on the margins. On to Tanzania now. The country is planning to increase its public spending for the fiscal year starting in July by 4%, partly due to high debt servicing costs and a growing wage bill. The East African nation's debt load has been growing in recent years. President John Pombe Magufuli's government has been ramping up borrowing to splurge on large infrastructure projects, on rail lines and power plants. From Dar es Salaam, here's Isaac Lucando.
Tanzania plans to increase government spending from the current $15.1 billion to $15.7 billion in the next financial year. The government credits the country's recently attained lower middle-income status to increased spending over the last 5 years.
There are
things that have been implemented faster and at greater levels than they were for long periods previously. For example, you see this in the criteria used to get middle-income status. This is individual incomes getting to an average of $1,036, reducing budget dependency and increasing spending on social services.
The increased budget will, among other things, be used to service government debt and cater to a growing wage bill. With only $11.2 billion coming from domestic sources, this economist believes expanding local sources is necessary.
We have very few taxpayers, so the tax base is very small, which means that few people are paying a lot of taxes to cover the rest. So it is the duty of the government to make sure that the tax base is widened for everybody to be able to pay tax smoothly.
According to the Ministry of Finance, out of the total budget, $9.9 billion will be recurrent expenditure, while $5.7 billion will be directed towards development projects. The rise in Tanzania's 2021-2022 budget estimates comes at a time when the country begins implementing its new 5-year development plan. The plan seeks to eradicate abject poverty and transform the economy from an agricultural economy with low productivity to a semi-industrialized one. Tanzania has been using a combination of local funds and borrowing to splurge on large infrastructure projects like railways and power plants. Experts believe the investment will be worthwhile.
In the very near future, we'll be saying goodbye to blackouts. We'll be saying goodbye to the dilapidated roads. We'll be saying goodbye to a lot of stuff that are hindering business environment. So this is very fundamental for the economic growth.
COVID-19, among other things, forced the government to lower its economic projections for 2020 to 5.5% from the initial projection of 6.9%. This year, the World Bank has expressed cautious optimism that Tanzania's economy may grow by 5.5%. Isaac Lucando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
All All right, then a quick run through some company headlines. Starting in Ethiopia, the communications regulator there has denied in a tweet that Kenya's largest telco, Safaricom, had made it to the shortlist of 6 firms selected to bid for one of 2 telco licenses on offer in the country. It said no prospective bidder had been shortlisted, pre-qualified or excluded from taking part in the bid process. The licenses will be offered this year. The mobile operators bidding for license to get into the Ethiopian market alongside affiliates Vodacom Group and Vodafone. Kenya Airways has resumed direct cargo flights between Nairobi and New Delhi as a carrier enhances freight businesses in the wake of low demand, relatively speaking, for passenger travel. The national carrier's first uplift from New Delhi included pharmaceutical, machinery and general merchandise. Even though KQ has converted some of its 787 Dreamliners into cargo planes, the carrier is still flying less cargo. Its closest rival, Ethiopian Airlines, has more than 7 Boeing 777 aircraft, giving it a competitive edge in the cargo business compared to KQ. The restaurant chain Java House Africa is set to tap a former KFC boss as its new CEO. Dirk van Houten will take over from Paul Smith as Java head from the 1st of March. Java was bought in 2017 by the private equity firm Abraj. Besides Kenya, the restaurant chain has operations in Uganda and Rwanda as well. It has ambitions to open outlets in Dar es Salaam, Lagos, Accra and Lusaka. And in the world of tech, the iPhone maker Apple has overtaken Samsung and Huawei to reclaim the top spot in global smartphone sales for the first time in 5 years. A study by Gartner says that Apple saw the best shipment volume of any vendor in a single quarter, the 4th quarter of 2020. Fueled, of course, by the release of the iPhone 12, Apple sold almost 80 million units of those in the final 3 months of the year. Samsung was second in terms of shipment with 73.9 million units sold for the last quarter of 2020. That's a run for your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. We're 15 minutes into the hour. Here's what's coming up. South Africa's alcohol industry estimated to lose nearly $2.4 billion due to pandemic restrictions. And now that Kenya and the United Kingdom have signed a trade deal, what exactly does it mean for exporters from East Africa? Details coming up shortly.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Let's head over to South Africa. The liquor sector over there is estimated to have lost some $2.4 billion in retail sales revenues in the on-again, off-again liquor bans that have been imposed in the country over the last 12 months. That's according to a report by FTI Consulting. Here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola examining the fallout.
The report estimates that there have been 200,000 job losses in the alcohol industry but it's also about the duties lost to the government coffers.
There's around 87 billion that's estimated to have lost just on your excise duties alone. So considering South Africa's current fiscal situation, that is important revenue that can really be ill afforded to have been gone. Overall, sales down from around 2019 for the 2020 period is down 17%. And of the sectors that have been hit the hardest, it's the beer and the wine sectors, which plays an important role in our tourism economy as well.
The alcohol sector is counting the cost of sales and export bans, no more so than the wine sector, which supports 269,000 people and contributes 1.1% to the country's GDP.
As a direct result of these alcohol bans, domestic wine sales were down by 20% in volume. And additionally, the 5-week export ban resulted in 300 million litres of uncontracted wine within 640 million litres of stock, at a time when the industry had commenced with the 2021 harvest, which created a stock dilemma.
The beer industry has also been severely affected.
And with beer sales having declined by 195 million litres, and a large proportion, as you can imagine, having to be dumped. And this is also, with the dumping, you also have to pay SARS to actually dump your alcohol that has expired.
The craft beer brewing sector has also felt the effects of government measures, with small business debt levels skyrocketing.
A lot of people had IDC loans, and IDC has been calling on now the loan repayments. And I think that, it is really disappointing, because a lot of these are government branches, and you would think that they would be a little bit more sensitive to the plight of the industry.
Perhaps as concerning are the long-term impacts on the wine export ban.
Our South African wine producers have to fight quite hard with our overseas counterparts to get that valuable shelf space in overseas markets, etc. So that will take many, many years, and estimates up to around a decade to rectify the impact.
It's uncertain how long it's going to take for the alcohol sector to recover from the curfews, the alcohol bans, and the different lockdown levels. What's of more concern, though, is what's going to happen to the value chains leading into those different subsectors. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, up north in Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh and the neighboring cities of Dahab and Uwaibi in Egypt's South Sinai region have depended mostly on tourism for their revenue for many years. But that, of course, does represent a singular concentration risk. As CGTN's Yasser Kimna reports, officials there are now rolling out plans to help the sectors and the people who live there to diversify.
Although it significantly supports Egypt's economy, tourism has been highly susceptible to external events over the past decade. And those most affected during tough times are the people who live in cities that are tourist attractions. That's why the government has embarked on a plan to diversify the sources of revenue for the people of South Sinai. The first university to open a campus in South Sinai is Saudi's King Salman University, and a second one is about to be set up. The aim is to offer local students different career options.
No one from this governorate would have dreamt that he will receive higher education in South Sinai. They all went to Suez and Ismailia cities or Cairo for education, causing instability and a lot of financial burden on their families.
In Sharm el-Sheikh, we offer studies that serve the city in tourism and hospitality, engineering, construction, arts, languages and high-tech sectors. We are also helping locals to establish and manage SMEs and startups, develop skills and produce handmade products.
Thousands of Egyptian and Arab students are expected to enroll in the universities, thus keeping the city busy throughout the year. Sharm el-Sheikh is also being transformed into an environmentally friendly city.
We are here at the commercial center. We have the second natural gas station, which will also have charging spots for electric vehicles. It will also offer services of transforming vehicle engines from petrol-based to natural gas or electricity-powered ones. It's all part of plans to make Sharm el-Sheikh a green city.
Nuweiba, a touristic town next to Sharm el-Sheikh, is expected to become a trade and investment region.
There is a port in Uwaibi. Therefore, Uwaibi is set to be a major commercial zone. We can benefit from being a link between the Western Arab Peninsula and Eastern Arab Peninsula.
Infrastructure such as houses, roads, and bridges are under construction to ease the movement of goods, businesses, and workers. These investments are expected to create job opportunities for the locals and a sustainable economy all year round, not just during the tourism season. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now on to the business of trade. Kenya's trade pact with the United Kingdom is designed to allow British firms to partly ship goods in duty-free over a 25-year window. Now there's a caveat on that. We'll come to that in a moment. The post-Brexit trade deal with the UK will open the window essentially for British companies to export goods, finished and unfinished goods, including agricultural and industrial products, at the expiry of a 7-year moratorium. The details of the trade agreement were revealed by the Ministry of Industrialization, Trade and Enterprise Development as it asked legislators to ratify the economic partnership agreement signed between Kenya and the UK on the 8th of December. Nairobi signed that post-Brexit trade deal in December. It's also designed to preserve duty and quota-free access of exports from Kenya to the UK after London formally exited the European Union at the end of December. All right, then, so let's walk through the details of this trade deal between the two sides. Let's talk to Eugene Ngumi. He's a senior consultant at Africa Practice. He joins us now live on the program. Eugene, so the UK, of course, was among the top 3 recipients of Kenyan exports last year. Uganda, of course, an equally large market. What are your initial impressions of the trade deal signed between the two sides?
Thanks for having me. Well, my initial impressions are that the deal is very much a domestication or almost direct transfer of the economic partnership agreement that was agreed with the European Union in 2016. It was done in record time almost, and that was really because Kenya was keen to maintain access to UK markets. And to do so, it had to have a deal in place by the time the UK formally exited the EU at the start of 2021. So the deal was urgent for both the UK, who wanted to show progress on trade deals done outside the EU, as well as Kenya. So it was a good fit for both at the time.
So essentially, this doesn't really change much vis-a-vis the prior trade relationship that essentially existed between the two sides.
No, for the time being, the status quo remains, and within that 7-year window that you mentioned. But after that 7-year window, what happens is that a 25-year essentially tariff-free access for UK goods into Kenya opens up. So for the next 7 years, the trade arrangement between the UK and Kenya remains the same. And then after that 7 years, UK companies and UK businesses will be free to export as and when they wish to Kenya without any tariffs.
So other members of the East African community, and this really has been an ongoing theme within the region, Tanzania, Uganda, I guess to some extent Rwanda as well, they've not been very happy with the sort of deals that Kenya has been striking unilaterally with entities like the United States and Kenya as well. Is this a case of sour grapes, or do they have a legitimate cause for concern?
It's a bit of both, to be honest. So among the EAC states, Kenya is the only one classified as middle income, whereas the rest of the EAC states are classified as lower income. This means that they have tariff-free access to markets in the EU and the UK that Kenya does not otherwise enjoy.
That's essentially under the everything but arms agreement, isn't it?
Yes, the Cotonou agreement, the everything but arms agreement. And what Kenya sees is a situation where it has these extremely important export markets, particularly in Europe, for its horticultural and agricultural exports, which would suddenly be cut off or be subject to tariffs if they didn't sign these deals. So there's a clear imperative on Kenya's part. And there's been delays, particularly on the part of other EAC members, to sign agreements with the EU in particular, and the UK. So even though the other EAC member states asked the UK to sign a transition agreement with Kenya while the whole bloc negotiated with the UK, there was a feeling in Kenya that wouldn't be successful after several years of a similar agreement being stalled because of a lack of agreement among members. But the other members do have a legitimate gripe in that it does undermine the unity and integrity of the customs union. And, after 7 years, what happens when tariff-free British goods come into the Kenyan market? How will they interact with the customs union as a part of the EAC.
But the counter argument to that would be, look, we've already had X number of years in which the EPA was essentially being negotiated. Countries had a lot of time to essentially align their trade policies to take advantage of it, and they did absolutely nothing. So the Kenyan government could argue, why should we take a penalty on trade and exports while you guys continue to enjoy tariff-free, quota-free access to other markets?
That's precisely the Kenyan government's argument. And in addition to that, the Kenyan government will say that in the case of this specific agreement with the UK, they have written in provisions that would allow other EAC member states to join in if and when they please. So it's not as if they made this agreement solely with their own interests in mind.
Assuming Kenyan legislators disagree the terms of trade on offer here, what happens next?
So under the terms of the Kenyan law, the Treaty Making and Ratification Act of 2012, Parliament can reject the treaty or it can object to certain provisions in the treaty. What that means is that the treaty won't be ratified, so it won't come into force, but it doesn't disallow the government from re-entering into negotiations with the United Kingdom over potentially problematic provisions. So the government has quite a bit of flexibility if the Kenyan Parliament rejects the agreement. If the same happens in the UK, there may be less flexibility on their part.
So that would essentially send both parties back to the drawing boards to come up with something arguably entirely new.
Potentially entirely new. It depends on what the substance of the rejection is, whether it's to the agreement as a whole, to the fact that the EAC isn't part of the agreement, or whether there's specific provisions that Parliament objects to. If there's specific provisions, then those can be renegotiated rather quickly. If it's from an ideological or philosophical perspective, then those would take some time to overcome.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Eugene Gumi from Africa Practice, thank you very much. Now, still on trade issues, Kenya's optimistic of that trade deal with the United Kingdom being ratified, even as trade talks with another traditional ally, the United States, do continue. Now, the UK has pushed a ratification deadline to allow the House of Lords to go through this trade agreement. The new US administration is yet to sign the trade pact negotiated with the former administration of the US President Donald Trump. Here's Robert Nagila with a summary.
For the United States, a key trade and security partner, tariff policy and market access are top on its agenda. Kenya, on the other hand, is eyeing a new deal with Washington before the 2025 expiry of the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. AGOA grants the country and 40 other African states duty-free access to the U.S. market with more than 6,000 product lines.
We have the opportunity to strengthen our relationship with a free trade agreement.
Trade between the two countries stood at $118 million in 2019, up 4.9% from 2018. With the UK, Kenya preferred a bilateral approach because of Brexit. Nairobi is keen on securing duty-free and quota-free market access to the UK. Among Kenya's top 5 export products to the UK are coffee, tea, vegetables, flowers and fruits. The trade pact was signed in December.
Both Kenya and the United Kingdom have strong resolve to deepen their economic ties.
But the political transition from former President Donald Trump's administration to that of President Joe Biden has left the talks in limbo. The Trump administration had pushed a unilateral approach, while Biden is said to prefer a multilateral approach.
The Trump administration was quickly trying to work on to withdraw from the World Trade Organization and then begin to effect its own agreements on a bilateral basis with different countries. And that is probably going to be stopped.
And early this week, the UK Parliament requested for more time to review the trade deal with Kenya. But experts say this is normal before it is ratified.
I don't think there is actually a stumbling block. They just want assurance in terms of how this will impact on the regional cohesion in East Africa.
The consensus from Nairobi is that a lot of progress has been made in talks with both countries, but a few issues still remain. When those talks will be concluded is yet unknown. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
From East Africa to North Africa, where Tunisia has allocated over $600 million in its 2021 budget to new infrastructure and construction projects. Tunisia's construction industry remains a key part of its wide economy, and it's seen as being vital to kick-starting a recovery, as CGTN's Adin Chouachi now reports.
Tunisian Prime Minister Hisham Mashishi has stressed that infrastructure and public works sector is important for improving the living condition of its citizens. Through a number of infrastructure projects, the North African state is helping to underpin industry demand and accelerate development amid a slowdown caused by the COVID-19 pandemic.
This sector is vital to the economy. The government has allocated more than $627 million in the state budget for the year 2021. This financing will help the department as well as hundreds of companies carry out different public works, housing and infrastructure projects planned to accelerate development.
The Tunisian Ministry of Public Works, Housing and Infrastructure has recently been granted the Certificate of Quality Management ISO 9001 by the French Association for Standardization. Authorities in Tunisia say that ISO 9001 Quality Management Certificate will allow the Infrastructure Ministry to carry out its projects more efficiently. The certificate will also guarantee the transparency of all operations.
We are giving priority to structural infrastructure projects because they create added value and new opportunities. The new quality management certificate will help the Infrastructure Ministry improve the services it offers. Tunisia has talented competences in the public works field.
According to the Export Promotion Center, local companies plan to conquer the African market and operate in many countries. Tunisian enterprises will build infrastructure with international standards and offer services in other sectors.
We are pushing for closer cooperation between Tunisian enterprises and companies in other African states. We have the experience and the expertise to respect international standards. Tunisia is full of success stories that we can export to other markets.
The French Association for Standardization and the Tunisia Ministry of Infrastructure announced that the ISO 9001 Quality Management Certificate is the first of its kind in Africa. Tunisian authorities assert that the new quality certificate confirms the success of the process of governance and good management of public projects in the North African state. In addition, it will strengthen the confidence of foreign investors in Tunisian companies. Adin Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
It's 18:37 GMT. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a break. Here's what's coming up next. Bitcoin has another wild ride. It falls by more than 16% and then recovers after a record-setting run to over $58,000. A new research reveals that more than half of UK employers intend to recruit staff in the next 3 months. Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Aviation, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. These are some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. Starting in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Italian ambassador to that country, Luca Attanasio, was killed on Monday in an ambush by armed assailants. He was in a UN convoy near the city of Goma. It's believed the attack was an attempted kidnapping. According to the Italian Foreign Ministry, a military policeman traveling with the ambassador was also killed in that incident. Libya's Interior Minister Fatih Bashaga says he escaped a well-planned assassination attempt. Gunmen had fired at his motorcade in the capital, Tripoli. According to the minister, a vehicle had been encroaching on his convoy, and then people inside that vehicle opened fire. That reportedly led to an exchange of fire, leading to the death of one of Bashaga's bodyguards and one attacker. Officials say they've arrested two of the assailants. Both were on the police's wanted list. And over in Uganda, the opposition leader Bobi Wine, better known as Robert Kyagulanyi, has directed his lawyers to withdraw a court case challenging last month's presidential election results. Mrs. Kyagulanyi claims that Supreme Court judges are biased. The 39-year-old pop star and lawmaker had rejected the poll's outcome, which declared the incumbent Yoweri Kaguta Museveni as the winner. Wine filed a case to have the court overturn the results. He now says the courts are not independent. That's a run through your headlines. Now, Elon Musk's embrace of Bitcoin last week was partly responsible, you could say, for rocketing the world's #1 cryptocurrency by a fair bit, 20% high to more than $58,300 over the weekend. But his cold shoulder over the weekend may also have contributed in part to its freefall. Bitcoin fell by more than 16% to under $50,000 in New York. It gave up more than $8,000, in fact, in a matter of hours, as the world's richest man tweeted his concern that the price had risen too far too quickly. The world's largest cryptocurrency has been on quite the tear this month, propelled not only by purchases from Tesla, they have about $1.5 billion of that crypto, but also institutional investors who say Bitcoin is an attractive alternative to gold and the dollar. In February alone, Bitcoin is up by more than 60%. As I mentioned earlier, it hit a new all-time high on Sunday. It came close to breaching that $59,000 mark. And as we speak, Bitcoin is back above $52,000. Now, more than half of UK employers intend to recruit staff in the next 3 months. The human resources body says it is the first positive sign for employment prospects it had seen in a year. Some 56% of some 2,000 firms surveyed planned to hire in the first 3 months of 2021. The sectors with the strongest hiring intentions included healthcare, finance, insurance, education, and ICT. The survey also found that the number of firms planning to make redundancies in the first quarter of 2021 dropped from 30% to 20% compared to the previous 3-month period. The most recent unemployment rate that covers from September to November was 5%. That's an increase of 0.6% over the previous 3 months. It essentially means 1.72 million people in the UK were unemployed. China, in the meantime, has released its strategy for the improvement of rural areas. The State Council Information Office provided details of the #1 central document for 2021 at a news event this morning. Cao Bing reports from that conference site in Beijing.
China has always been putting rural and agricultural issues of top priority in China's national policies. In the #1 central document issued on Sunday, China again stressed the importance of rural vitalization and agricultural modernization. Actually, the idea of rural vitalization was not first proposed this year. It was first proposed at the 19th National CPC Congress, along with the task of poverty alleviation, which was completed by the end of last year. Apart from that, China has also made other substantial progress, such as increasing the agricultural production capacity and increasing rural people's incomes. The Minister of Agriculture and Rural Ministry said all these outcomes have laid a solid foundation for the next step of our rural vitalization, and the outcomes of poverty alleviation should be consolidated to make that happen.
The two ensured aspects are the consolidation of the outcomes of the poverty eradication program and food security. The document highlighted the importance of a transitional period for a smooth transition from poverty eradication to rural vitalization, and ensuring that no large-scale poverty ever appears again. It also requested provincial governments to maintain the grain planting acreage and increase yield to ensure a constant annual production of 650 million plus tons in the 14th five-year plan period.
This year's Spring Festival saw a surge in sales of gold jewellery. Experts expect this to continue as people look for safe haven assets at a time of global uncertainty. Gao Ang has that story.
Gold hasn't lost its appeal. According to the China Gold Association, sales rose by more than 80% year-on-year during this year's Spring Festival holiday. It's seen as a safe investment amid global headwinds.
I buy gold jewelry because it keeps its value. Whatever the price of gold, if there are styles that look good, we will buy some.
Experts say the gold rush is partly due to the increasing uncertainties in the global economy and expectations of rising inflation. They say the demand for gold will continue in the long term.
So there is a decline in the dollar's status, and there are very few alternatives for dollars. And a lot of people are expecting that the global inflation will rise given the very aggressive monetary expansion in many of the economies.
But a recovery after the pandemic is expected to bring more stability to prices of commodities, including gold.
Because by then the uncertainty will be lower and people don't have to store up something that doesn't have real value. We have to remember that gold is a precious metal, but it has very little practical use except for jewelry and a little bit for industrial sector.
Despite its shimmering appeal, gold also reflects people's fear of uncertainty and hope for a more stable future. Gang, CGTN, Beijing.
Restaurateurs across the world have taken very different tacks to avoid wasting the ingredients on their shelves during this pandemic. In Japan, it's pretty much no different. A lot more restaurants in Tokyo are choosing to chill the ingredients to keep costs down. With this report, here's CGTN's Mayu Yoshida on what's hot tonight.
Fewer customers, expensive rents, and shorter business hours. High-end restaurant Cross Tokyo in the Japanese capital is just one of many struggling during the COVID-19 pandemic.
もう本当に 10%
Customers have dropped to 10 to 20%. We used to host corporate events, birthday parties, and over 150 weddings every year. All of them now gone.
Japanese authorities have accused restaurants of being the country's biggest source of infection. To make ends meet, eateries like this are increasingly choosing to freeze their food and investing in new technology to do so. These are veggies picked from the farm. Thinly cut vegetables like these are hard to freeze while preserving their best qualities. But with the right freezer, the right level of temperature, and the right timing, they're able to keep their crispness. Ready-to-eat frozen foods like these are becoming more popular in Japan as more people eat and work at home. Tokyo-based Daybreak is one company taking advantage. It uses technology to blast cold air and flash freeze food to as low as -35 degrees Celsius. The company says this enables longer storage of food without losing its taste and color, and the owners of Cross Tokyo are impressed.
できる限り限りなく新鮮なものをお届けしたいというところを追求されていると。僕らはどちらかというと
Our restaurant refrigerator can also freeze, but it's for storage. Theirs focuses on keeping food nutritious and fresh. As a professional, we wanted to pursue the latter, even if it costs a lot of money.
Refrigeration varies according to things like water content, ingredients, and the size of the food. Daybreak claims that it can find the perfect balance by combining data and advice from nutritionists. Sales for the firm doubled last year as more restaurants moved away from face-to-face services and into food delivery.
Demand of frozen food among consumers is growing rapidly. Eating at home has become a norm, and consumers now want to spend their money on high-quality delivery delicious food. And they also order directly from restaurants to support them. On the other hand, suppliers are struggling to find buyers. That's where high-tech freezing comes in.
The frozen food business in Japan goes back to more than a century. With COVID-19 changing life everywhere, restaurants here are turning to tech to secure their future. Mayushida, CGTN, Tokyo.
Quick run through commodity prices. Industrial metals having a very interesting time. Copper forwards in London vaulted to multi-year highs, crossing over $9,000 a tonne for the first time in 9 years, according to Bloomberg data. In part, this is a supply-demand story, with economic recovery in some key economies, China comes to mind, pushing up demand to levels that current available supply isn't able to meet at the moment. Now, there's also a broad rise in commodity prices, and we're still just in the first quarter of the year. With today's 2.6% rise, Brent crude is back to levels we saw back in the first quarter of 2019. Analysts at Goldman Sachs, in fact, expect that this rally still has a fair bit of steam behind it. They're expecting Brent to hit $75 a barrel by the third quarter. Here's what's coming up next. Well, indulge in an interesting story of recycling. A Kenyan startup is turning these nagging locusts into animal feed. Let's head over to Kenya. Locust swarms have hit the country's agricultural sector fairly hard. But one Kenyan startup is looking to help farmers earn a living from these pests. Here's Astatal with that story.
Kenya is well known for its wildlife, but a different type of species has overrun parts of the country. Locust swarms now cover farms, destroying crops. But this Kenyan startup is trying to make a profit off the pest.
Biological behavior of locusts is that they start roosting in the evening from 6:30 and up to 8 in the following day, 8, 9. So we normally like to have them try to start harvesting as early as 5:30 because they are sleeping, they are weak, they can't move, they can just be picked or they can shake the trees and collect. It's easier for them to collect. You can't collect locusts during the midday because they keep on flying.
Farmers get paid 50 Kenyan shillings, around 45 US cents per kilo. In an 18-day period, the project says it oversaw the collection of 1.3 tons of locust. The current locust plague is the worst in decades, hitting farmers hard. The project is looking to give the farmers an alternative source of income.
They destroy all the crops when they get into the farms. Sometimes there are so many, you cannot tell crops and locusts apart.
In addition to Laikipia, Bug Picture is working with communities in Isiolo and Samburu counties. They're all located in central Kenya. Astatal, CGTN.
And finally, London's most fashionable week was held online over the weekend. As CGTN's Catherine Drew finds out, instead of the front row and the flashlights, there's a lot that has changed for the world of fashion.
I do believe in my product. I do believe in what I do, or else I wouldn't have done it.
In 2020, stylist turned designer Deborah Latouche launched her modest fashion label with a show at London Fashion Week.
I actually basically decided that it was kind of now or never. Forget Brexit. Forget that, it's not the best financial time.
But worries over Brexit were soon superseded. This interview with Deborah Latouche never aired as the pandemic came to dominate the news cycle. Now a year later, Deborah is preparing for her work to be featured again at London Fashion Week.
I had so many plans, so many things that you were kind of supposed to do once you launched a brand. And then all of a sudden I was at home with my children. And, but it actually, I think it was really good because it really gave me a great amount of time to really consider how the brand is going to work for me and my family.
Like the fishing, car and music industries, the fashion and textile sector is dealing with not only the fallout from the pandemic, but also at the same time grappling with major changes in the way it trades with its closest international market, the European Union, due to Brexit.
You've got a variety of different issues, which each of them are a perfect storm, but in totality are nothing less than a tsunami.
Advocacy groups say the fashion and textile industry, worth nearly $50 billion annually and employing almost 1 million people, could be decimated by the challenges ahead. 455 brands and individuals signed an open letter to the government calling for immediate help and policy changes. Areas of concern include the end of free movement for goods and people after Brexit, creating additional paperwork, delays and extra expense, impacting small companies to major brands and individual models and stylists. The end of tax-free shopping for overseas tourists is another concern, particularly for the luxury sector, and leaves the UK as the only European country not to offer this perk. And the Fashion Roundtable says a shortage of garment workers is alarming and visas should be available for overseas workers while efforts to train the domestic workforce are brought forward.
We make 35 billion in the UK and music makes something like 2 billion. Fishing, which has had £23 million worth of support from the government for exports, makes the same amount of money as East London does from the fashion industry.
So far, the UK government has not responded to the Fashion Roundtable, but insists it is proactively reaching out to industry leaders to lend support and expertise in navigating the new rules. Catherine Drew, CGTN, London.
Quick run through the currencies as we wrap up the programme. The Naira continues its weakening run against the American dollar in the interbank market, down over 7% today, 410.25 to the American dollar. The rand is settling in around the 1470 range. Later this week on Wednesday, on the 24th, we're going to be hearing from the finance minister when he lays out his spending and tax proposals for 2021. Bitcoin, of course, as we mentioned, very wild ride over the weekend. It rose to as much as $58,300 on Sunday, pulled back under 50,000. And then, of course, it's back to around $53,000 at the moment. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the programme. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. Well, today's up next from Washington, D.C.